Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it. I remember the first day I set foot in Lloyd Wright School as if it were yesterday. The air in Chicago had a bite that morning, the wind whistling through the narrow streets, carrying with it the promise of something big. I wasn't nervous. I was 11 after all, and already knew I was different from the others. My mind was sharper, faster. I didn't just learn. I devoured information, consuming books like the other kids inhaled candy. Walking up to the towering gates of Lloyd Wright felt monumental. The building itself was imposing, a fortress of red brick and stone that seemed to stare down at me with a kind of cold indifference. This was a place for geniuses, they said. A breeding ground for the minds that would one day change the world. I was determined to be one of them. My parents had sacrificed everything to get me here. Dad worked double shifts at the factory while Mom gave up her part-time job to homeschool me, prepping me for the Lloyd Wright entrance exams. They believed in me, more than I believed in myself sometimes, but seeing the pride in their eyes that day was enough to steel my nerves. John remembered, my father had said, his rough hands resting on my shoulders as we stood in front of the massive entrance. It's not just about being smart. You got to prove you belong here. Keep your head high. I nodded, though inside, I felt the weight of their holds pressing down on me like a heavy stone. This was more than just school. It was the start of something much bigger. The first few weeks were tough. Not academically. I breezed through the coursework with ease. It was the social aspect that threw me off. The other kids, most of them wealthy, connected, and groomed for success from birth, treated me like an outsider. They sensed I wasn't one of them. Sure, I was smart, maybe even smarter than most of them, but I didn't fit in their world of lavish family vacations and weekend horseback riding. The whispers followed me down the hallways. Teacher's pet, show off, and the cruelest of them all, freak. But I had Alex Reynolds. Alex was different. He wasn't like the others. He came from a modest background like mine, and he understood what it meant to feel out of place. We became fast friends, bonding over our shared love for science fiction and our dreams for the future. We'd sit in the cafeteria, surrounded by kids who couldn't care less about us, and discussed everything from space travel to quantum mechanics. One day, I'm gonna be a pilot, Alex would say, his eyes lighting up as he doodled spaceships in the margins of his notebook. And I'm going to change the world, I'd respond, though I wasn't entirely sure how just yet. But despite having Alex by my side, the isolation gnawed at me. I wasn't just another student at Lloyd Wright, I was a prodigy, and that made me a target. I knew the teachers were watching, waiting for me to prove that I was more than just a boy with potential. And when the National Young Talent Contest was announced, I knew this was my moment. The contest was everything. It was the crown jewel of Lloyd Wright, the ultimate test of intellect, creativity, and perseverance. The winner would be hailed as the brightest young mind in the country, a title that could open doors to opportunities I couldn't even imagine. I threw myself into preparation. Weeks turned into months as I studied late into the night, memorizing facts, solving problems, and preparing for every possible scenario. Alex helped as much as he could, though the contest wasn't for him. It was my battle. "John, you're going to kill it," Alex said one night as we sat in the library, the faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "I've never seen anyone like you, man. You've got this." "I don't know," I admitted, staring at the stacks of books in front of me. "What if I screw up? What if they're right about me? Who cares what they think?" Alex shot back, his voice firm. "You're smarter than all of them combined. Don't let them get into your head." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that my hard work would pay off, that I would rise above the whispers and the doubts. But there was a nagging fear in the back of my mind, one I couldn't quite shake. What if it wasn't enough? The day of the contest arrived, and with it, a strange calm settled over me. I dressed in my best clothes, nothing fancy, just a button-down shirt and slacks, but I felt ready. My parents were there, of course, beaming with pride as they dropped me off at the school. Inside the auditorium, the air was thick with tension. Hundreds of eyes watched as the students filed in, each of us taking our assigned seats. The stage loomed ahead, where Principal Simon Archer stood behind a podium, his cold gaze sweeping over the crowd. Archer was an intimidating figure, tall, thin, and always impeccably dressed. His reputation for being strict and unyielding was well known among the students. Today, Archer's voice boomed through the microphone. "We will see who among you truly has what it takes to be the best." I took a deep breath. This was it. The contest began with a series of written tests, logic puzzles, advanced mathematics, and abstract reasoning. I flew through them, my pencil racing across the paper as I tackled each problem with ease. I could feel the eyes of my teachers on me, but I shut everything out. It was just me and the questions. After the written portion came the oral exams. We were called up one by one to answer questions in front of the entire auditorium. When my name was called, I felt a wave of anticipation ripple through the crowd. I could hear the whispers, the murmurs of doubt, but I ignored them. Standing in front of the judges, I answered each question with confidence. Physics, no problem. Historical analysis, easy. By the time I finished, I could tell from the looks on their faces that I had impressed them. This was my moment, and I had nailed it. But as I returned to my seat, something changed. Archer stepped up to the microphone, his expression unreadable. Before we continued, he began, his voice cold and measured. "I have an important announcement." I froze, a sense of dread creeping over me. "John Campbell," Archer said, his gaze locking onto mine. "You are hereby disqualified from this contest for cheating." Cheating. The room erupted into gasps and whispers, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. My mind raced. Cheating? How? Why? "I didn't cheat," I stammered, my voice cracking as I looked around, hoping for someone, anyone, to come to my defense. But the auditorium was silent. Even Alex wouldn't meet my eyes. Archer continued, his voice a hammer striking down on my dreams. "We have evidence that suggests you had access to the contest materials before today's event. Therefore, you are disqualified from both the contest and this institution, effective immediately." It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. How could this be happening? I was innocent. I hadn't seen any contest materials, hadn't done anything wrong. "Please," I begged, turning to the teachers who had once praised me. "This isn't true. I didn't cheat. You have to believe me." But their faces were cold, indifferent. No one was coming to my rescue. My parents were called to the school that afternoon, their faces pale with shock and disbelief. As we drove home in silence, I stared out the window, my heart heavy with shame and confusion. Everything I had worked for was gone. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been stolen from me. In the days following my expulsion, I replayed every detail in my mind, trying to pinpoint where it all went wrong. My parents had tried to console me, but their words felt empty. The betrayal wasn't just from the school, it was from everyone who should have stood up for me. Weeks passed, and I watched as life moved on for my peers at Lloyd Wright School. They continued with their studies, while I sat in a cramped room in our modest apartment, surrounded by books that now felt meaningless. My reputation, built on hard work and talent, was shattered. Even Alex stopped calling. One afternoon, the silence was broken by a hesitant knock on the door. My father answered, and I heard a familiar voice. "Mr. Campbell, can I speak with John?" It was Alex. I stepped out into the hallway and saw him standing there, shifting nervously on his feet. "I'm sorry, John," he muttered, eyes downcast. "For what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "They said you cheated," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Everyone believes it, the teachers, the students, even the judges from the contest. But I didn't," I snapped, feeling the heat of frustration rising in my chest. "You know I didn't." "I do." Alex's eyes finally met mine. "But the rumors, they're everywhere. I tried to defend you, but it's like no one cares what's true anymore." I stood there stunned. The betrayal wasn't just from the school, but from the system itself, the teachers, the administration, even my classmates. They had all turned their backs on me. My mind raced, and I knew then that there was more to this than a simple accusation of cheating. "I need to know how this started," I said firmly. "Someone had to plant this lie." Alex looked around nervously before leaning in. "There's something I overheard in the teacher's lounge. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I heard Principal Archer talking with Mr. Clarkson, the head of the contest committee." My heart raced. "What did they say?" Alex hesitated, glancing around as if someone might be listening. They mentioned your name, and I heard Archer say something like, "We can't afford any scandals this year. We'll make an example of him." And then Clarkson just nodded. I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't a mistake or some mix-up. It was deliberate. I had been sacrificed to protect the school's reputation. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" I asked, my voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "I didn't know what to do, John," Alex admitted, his voice cracking. "I was scared. They're powerful people. And after what happened to you, I didn't want to be next." For a moment, I stood there, frozen in place. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. It wasn't just about a contest or even my academic career. It was about power, manipulation, and control. "That's why they targeted me," I muttered under my breath, piecing together the events. Because I didn't fit into their mold. They couldn't afford for someone like me, an outsider, to rise to the top. Alex reached out, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, John. I should have stood by you." I shook my head, swallowing the rising bitterness. "It's not your fault," I said, though deep down, I felt a growing divide between us. "But I need to find out the truth. I can't just let this go." Later that night, after Alex had left, I sat in my room, staring at the ceiling. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. The injustice of it all burned inside, but it also sparked something new, determination. I began gathering my thoughts, piecing together every conversation, every event, every odd interaction that had led to my expulsion. The more I dug, the more I realized how meticulously planned it had been. The cheating accusation wasn't a fluke, it was a tool wielded by those who wanted to control the narrative. The next morning, I sat down with my parents, laying everything out in front of them. "They did this to protect the school's image," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and determination. "They didn't care about the truth. They needed a scapegoat." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but my father's jaw tightened. He had always been a man of few words, but in that moment, I saw a fire ignite in him. "We won't let them get away with this, John," he said, his voice low but steady. That day marked a turning point. The betrayal had shattered me, but it also gave me purpose. I wasn't just going to be another victim of the system. I was going to expose the lies, the manipulation, and the betrayal that had been hidden in the shadows of Lloyd Wright School. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. 22 years had passed since that fateful day at Lloyd Wright School, and yet the memories still lingered like an open wound. I had built a life far removed from that place. A successful career as a lawyer respected by my peers, admired by my clients. But there was always a part of me that couldn't forget the injustice, the betrayal. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the call came. I was sitting in my office, reviewing the case, when my assistant, Laura, knocked on the door. "John," she said, peeking in, "there's a call for you. A woman named Eleanor Andrews." I frowned. The name didn't ring any bells. Did she say what it's about? "She said she's the principal of Lloyd Wright School," Laura replied, raising an eyebrow. "She sounds insistent." I felt a chill run down my spine. Lloyd Wright. After all these years? Why now? I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the pen in my hand. Then, with a nod, I gestured for Laura to transfer the call. "Mr. Campbell," came a cool, authoritative voice on the other end. "This is Eleanor Andrews, principal of Lloyd Wright School. I apologize for reaching out to you out of the blue, but we need your help." I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. "My help?" I asked, unable to mask the bitterness in my voice. What could Lloyd Wright possibly need from me? There was a brief pause, then a sigh. "I'm aware of the history you have with the school, Mr. Campbell. That's exactly why I'm calling. We're facing a lawsuit, a serious one. A former teacher is accusing us of corruption, and we need legal representation from someone outside the usual circles, someone with integrity." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Integrity? You're calling me, a man who was expelled from that very school for something I didn't do, to represent you?" "I understand how this must sound," Andrews continued, her tone shifting to one of urgency. "But the case involves incidents from years ago, during your time as a student. If you take this case, you'll have access to all the records, all the documents. You'll be able to investigate everything. My breath caught. She had my attention. This wasn't just about a lawsuit. This was an opportunity, a chance to finally uncover the truth about what had happened all those years ago. What's the teacher accusing the school of? I asked, my voice hardening. She claims there was a deliberate effort to expel certain students to protect the school's reputation. Andrews said, her words carefully chosen. She says it happened under Principal Archer's tenure and that several students, including yourself, were targeted. I gripped the phone tighter. So, I hadn't been paranoid. It had been a deliberate strategy, a cover-up to protect the school's image. And now it was all coming to light. I'll take the case, I said. My decision made in an instant. But understand this, Principal Andrews, I'm not doing this to save your school. I'm doing it to uncover the truth. Fair enough, she replied, her voice calm but firm. I'll have my assistant send over the details. I look forward to working with you, Mr. Campbell. As I hung up the phone, my mind raced. This was it. The chance I had been waiting for. For years, I had buried the pain, the anger, but now it was all rushing back. I was going back to Lloyd Wright, not as a victim, but as someone who held the power to expose the corruption that had destroyed my childhood. The next day, I found myself driving through the streets of Chicago, the skyline a familiar yet distant presence. I hadn't been back to Lloyd Wright School since the day of my expulsion. I had done everything I could to forget it, to move on. But as I pulled up to the grand brick building, memories flooded back. The school looked the same as it had all those years ago. Its imposing gates, the pristine lawn, the rows of windows that seemed to watch over everyone who entered. But it felt different now. I wasn't the scared, betrayed boy I had been. I was John Campbell, lawyer, and I was here to settle a score. I stepped out of the car, my coat billowing in the autumn wind, and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the hallways were filled with students rushing between classes, their laughter and chatter echoing off the walls. It felt surreal, like stepping into a time capsule. Mr. Campbell? I turned to see a woman approaching, her heels clicking on the tile floor. She was in her late 40s with short, silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Eleanor Andrews. She extended a hand. Thank you for coming, she said, her tone polite but businesslike. I hope we can put the past behind us and work together on this. I shook her hand, my expression guarded. We'll see about that. She led me to her office, a spacious room lined with bookshelves and framed photos of past students. As I sat down, Andrews handed me a thick folder. These are the documents related to the case, she explained. The former teacher, Mrs. Whittaker, claims that Principal Archer orchestrated a scheme to remove students who could damage the school's reputation. Students who were too ambitious, too outspoken. She has evidence to back her claims. I opened the folder and scanned the documents, emails, meeting notes, internal memos. As I flipped through the pages, one name kept appearing, mine. They singled me out, I muttered, my hands shaking slightly as I read. They planned my expulsion. Andrews nodded. It appears so. Whittaker kept these records for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. She believes there was a cover-up, and now she's suing the school for wrongful termination. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the revelation sinking in. So she was fired for trying to expose this? Yes, Andrews said, and now she's coming after us. I closed the folder, my mind racing. This was bigger than I had imagined. Not only had I been wronged, but others had suffered as well, all to protect the reputation of Lloyd Wright School. I'll take the case, I said again, more resolutely this time. But I need full access to everything, emails, records, anything that can help me understand what really happened. Of course, Andrews replied, you'll have complete cooperation from the school. The truth was finally within reach, but I knew that this was just the beginning. There were more secrets buried here, and I was going to uncover every single one of them. For the first time in 22 years, I was ready to face the shadows of my past. 2 weeks into my investigation, I had already unearthed enough evidence to confirm that the school's cover-up was far more insidious than I had initially suspected. The plan to expel me was meticulously orchestrated, part of a larger scheme to rid Lloyd Wright of any students who might tarnish his perfect reputation. I had stumbled upon dozens of documents implicating Principal Archer and other senior staff in their ruthless pursuit of maintaining the school's image at the cost of students' futures. But I was still missing the final piece, the person who could tie it all together. And that's when I found her. I was in my office late one evening, going through old emails between Archer and a mysterious figure referred to only as J.W. The initials kept appearing in critical discussions about students being reassigned or transferred for the school's long-term interests. My gut told me this J.W. was someone crucial, someone who could provide the key to unraveling everything. As I paced the office, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from Laura, my assistant. She had tracked down a former teacher from Lloyd Wright who had been involved in many of the decisions during that time. Her name was Janet Whittaker. Whittaker, J.W. I muttered under my breath, realization dawning on me. She was the one. She had been there, behind the scenes, witnessing it all. Now she was coming forward. The next morning, I arranged a meeting with Janet Whittaker. We agreed to meet at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, far from the prying eyes of Lloyd Wright's influential circles. As I walked into the cafe, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sharp autumn air. My eyes scanned the room, and there she was, sitting by the window, a woman in her late 50s, her face lined with age, but her eyes sharp and alert. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her coffee cup, but she radiated an air of quiet strength. I approached the table, and she looked up, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Campbell, I presume." "Ms. Whittaker," I nodded, taking the seat across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." She sighed, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. I suppose it was only a matter of time before someone came looking. I kept quiet for too long. "Then why now?" I asked, leaning in. "Why come forward after all these years?" Her eyes flickered with a mix of guilt and resignation. "Because it's time the truth came out. You were wronged, Mr. Campbell, along with so many others. I was part of it, but I never agreed with what they did. I was too scared to speak out back then, but now I want to make things right." I studied her face, searching for sincerity. Her hands were steady now, her gaze unwavering. She was telling the truth. She wasn't just a cog in the machine. She had been one of the few who had tried to fight back. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I need to know what really happened." Whittaker took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "It all started when Principal Archer took over. He was obsessed with maintaining the school's image. He believed that any student who didn't fit his vision, whether they were too outspoken, too ambitious, or just not right material, had to go. And you were part of this?" She nodded, shame clouding her features. "I was a senior administrator at the time. I sat in on meetings. I read the emails. I saw it all. But I never agreed with it. I never signed off on the expulsions or the decisions to sabotage students' futures. I tried to push back, but Archer, he was too powerful. He had allies on the board, and anyone who stood in his way was pushed out." "Like you?" I asked, recalling Eleanor Andrews' words about Whittaker being wrongfully terminated. She smiled bitterly. "Exactly like me. After I refused to participate in your expulsion, they found a way to get rid of me. I was fired for insubordination, but we both know the real reason." I clenched my fists under the table. So, this was the woman who had tried to stop them, who had fought for me when no one else had. But her resistance had cost her everything, just as it had cost me. "And the others?" I pressed. "How many students did they do this to?" Whittaker's expression darkened. "Dozens, maybe more. You weren't the only one. Archer had a list, a literal list of students he considered a threat. If you didn't fit the mold, you were either expelled or pushed out in some other way. Sometimes they framed students for cheating, like they did with you. Other times, they falsified academic records, made it impossible for students to transfer to other schools. It was all about protecting the brand." My stomach churned with anger. This wasn't just about me. This was a systemic abuse of power, and it had ruined lives. I could feel the weight of it settling on my shoulders, the responsibility to expose it all, to make sure no one else suffered the way I had. "I need your help," I said quietly, locking eyes with her. "I can't do this alone. If we're going to bring this to light, I need you to testify. You have the evidence, the emails, the documents. You can prove everything. Whittaker hesitated, her fingers tightening around her cup. Testify, she echoed, her voice wavering. I don't know, Mr. Campbell. If I come forward publicly, they'll come after me. Archer's not around anymore, but his allies are still there. They'll try to discredit me, destroy what little life I have left. I leaned in closer, my voice firm but understanding. I know it's a risk, Janet, but think about what's at stake. This isn't just about you or me. It's about every student they've wronged, every life they've ruined. If we don't stand up now, they'll keep doing this. We have the chance to stop them. You have the chance to finally do the right thing. She stared at me, her eyes flickering with fear and determination. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then slowly, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. I'll testify. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. As we parted ways, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication, but also trepidation. Whittaker had the evidence I needed to bring down the school's corruption, but there were still powerful people who would fight to keep their secrets buried. I sat across from Eleanor, my fingers drumming rhythmically on the armrest of the leather chair. The walls of her office were adorned with awards and photographs from past events, some of which I recognized from my time at Lloyd Wright School. One particular photo of me standing with Principal Simon Archer during my short-lived glory days caught my eye. John, Eleanor began, her voice breaking my concentration. We need to dig deeper into the school's records. I've been thinking, this case, your case, they might be connected. She adjusted her glasses, her eyes reflecting both concern and determination. I nodded slowly. I've been suspecting that. There's something that doesn't add up. I've spoken to some of the old staff, and one thing keeps coming up. There's more to my expulsion than what I was told. My voice was steady, but I felt the old anger rising inside. Eleanor sighed, leaning forward. You have to understand, John, the school was under a lot of pressure back then. There were external forces involved, people with power and influence, donors who were invested in the school's image. Your expulsion, it wasn't just about cheating. I froze, the words hanging in the air. What do you mean? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. There were whispers, rumors among the board members at the time. It's likely that your expulsion was orchestrated to protect someone else, Eleanor confessed, her voice low. Someone important. My heart pounded as the realization began to sink in. I was a scapegoat. Who? I asked, my tone sharper now. Who were they protecting? Eleanor looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Simon Archer was acting under pressure from one of our major donors at the time, Walter Sinclair. His son, Derek, was competing in the same contest as you. I remembered Derek Sinclair well, a boy with an overinflated ego, always quick to boast about his family's wealth and connections. He had been a mediocre student at best, but his father's influence was well known throughout the school. So, they ruined my life to protect Sinclair's son. My voice was rising now, the injustice of it all hitting me like a tidal wave. They accused me of cheating to save Derek's reputation. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. Her silence was an answer in itself. I stood abruptly, pacing the room as the memories of that day came flooding back. The humiliation, the disbelief, the anger. It all made sense now. I had been sacrificed to protect the school's reputation and the future of a wealthy donor's son. The injustice burned in my chest like a fire I couldn't put out. Eleanor stood as well, watching me carefully. John, I'm not trying to justify what happened, but there's more. I've discovered something, documents from that time, hidden in the school's archives. They might help us build the case and uncover the full truth. I stopped pacing, turning to face her. What kind of documents? Records, emails, meeting notes from the board at the time. It's risky, but if we can get our hands on them, we might find the evidence we need to expose what really happened, Eleanor explained, her voice filled with urgency. I'll need full access to those archives, I said firmly. No more secrets. If we're going to expose this, we do it all the way. Eleanor nodded. I'll make sure you get access, but be careful. There are still people who won't want this information coming to light. Sinclair still has ties to this school. Eleanor Andrews had granted me full access to the school's archives. But the deeper I dug, the more resistance I faced. It wasn't just the dusty basement records slowing me down. Walter Sinclair was becoming a real threat. I'd uncovered enough to prove that Sinclair had pressured the school to expel me, but the evidence was thin. It seemed someone had been tampering with the documents. I sat across from Eleanor in her office once again, frustration mounting. "Someone's erasing the truth," I said, tossing a few redacted files on her desk. "It's like they're one step ahead." Eleanor frowned, flipping through the files. "I don't understand. I've given you full access. No one else should be able to get to these." "They've been altered," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I think it's Sinclair. He knows we're close." Before Eleanor could respond, the door swung open, and in walked none other than Derek Sinclair. He hadn't changed much from the cocky, entitled teenager I remembered. His expensive suit and arrogant smirk told me everything I needed to know. He was just like his father. Well, Derek said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look who's back, digging through old skeletons. Can't you just let the past stay buried, Campbell?" I stood, eyes narrowing at him. "I should have known you'd be involved in this. Your father's dirty little secret is coming to light, Derek, whether you like it or not." Derek chuckled, leaning against the doorframe. "You think you've won something? You think exposing this old scandal is going to do anything? My father owns half this city, and he'll make sure whatever evidence you think you have disappears." "Not this time," I said firmly. "I have enough to prove what he did, how he pressured the school into expelling me to protect your reputation." Derek's smile faded, replaced by a steely glare. "You're playing with fire, John. My father's not someone you want to cross." Before I could respond, Eleanor stepped in. "This isn't a game, Derek. John deserves justice. We've uncovered enough to know your father's involvement in John's expulsion. This won't be covered up anymore." Derek straightened up, his arrogance returning. "You think you're going to take him down? I'd like to see you try." With a final smug look, he turned and left the office, slamming the door behind him. Eleanor let out a breath. "This is going to get ugly." I nodded, my jaw clenched. "Let it. I'm ready." The next few days were a whirlwind of tension. Derek's threats weren't idle. Files began disappearing from the archives, and key witnesses who had agreed to testify suddenly backed out. Sinclair was pulling strings behind the scenes, doing everything in his power to stop me. The lawsuit against Lloyd Wright School was set to go public in just a few days, and I could feel the pressure building. Sinclair wasn't done yet. Derek began a smear campaign against me, leaking stories to the press about my expulsion and framing me as a liar and troublemaker. But instead of retreating, I pushed harder. With Miss Whitaker's testimony, we had enough to make our case. But there was one final piece of the puzzle: the original meeting notes from the school board's decision to expel me. They had been tampered with, but I suspected there was an unaltered version somewhere, hidden from prying eyes. Late one night, I received an anonymous tip, someone claiming to have information that could help me. The message instructed me to meet at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. I was cautious, but I had no choice. This could be the key to everything. When I arrived, I found a man waiting in the shadows. He stepped forward, revealing himself to be none other than Simon Archer, the former principal. "Archer," I said, surprised, "you're the one who contacted me." He nodded, his face lined with regret. "I've done a lot of terrible things in my time, John, but I'm ready to make things right." He handed me a folder. "These are the original records from your expulsion. I kept copies, knowing that one day the truth would need to come out." I opened the folder, and there it was, the unredacted evidence. Emails from Walter Sinclair, directly instructing Archer to expel me or risk losing the school's funding. It was all there in black and white. "Why now?" I asked, looking up at him. Archer sighed. "Because I can't live with the guilt anymore. I've destroyed enough lives. It's time for the truth." With the original documents in hand, I walked into the courtroom a few days later, ready to face the Sinclairs head-on. Derek and his father sat across from me, their expressions cold and confident, but I had the truth on my side. As the trial unfolded, I presented the evidence, Miss Whitaker's testimony, the unaltered records, and every piece of corruption that had taken place at Lloyd Wright School. The Sinclairs tried to fight back, but their lies crumbled under the weight of the truth. The jury's decision was unanimous. The Sinclairs were found guilty of manipulating the school and orchestrating my expulsion. The school board was forced to issue a public apology, and Walter Sinclair's influence crumbled as the scandal made headlines. Derek stormed out of the courtroom, his face red with rage, but I didn't care. Justice had finally been served. A few weeks later, I stood in front of Lloyd Wright School, the sun setting behind the old brick building. It was a bittersweet moment, returning to the place that had once been the source of my greatest pain. But now, it was also the place where I had reclaimed my dignity. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.